Hello, my name is Marek Jakubiec. I work as an assistant professor at the Jagiellonian University Faculty of Law and Administration. And today I would like to briefly describe the relationship between theory of conceptual metaphors and theories of legal concepts. In the first part, because this lecture is divided into two parts, in the first part, I will try to present a brief introduction to metaphor theory and the distinction between concrete and abstract concepts. Because metaphor theory, in the sense that is linked to the contemporary research within the cognitive sciences, is not something that we usually understand as a metaphor, because metaphor here is a cognitive tool rather than purely linguistic tool. And to understand how we understand abstractness and how we process abstract concepts, according to many contemporary psychologists and cognitive scientists, it is necessary to understand what conceptual metaphor theory is. And that's why this lecture is aimed at introducing this theory. So let's start. The first very important thing is the distinction. Very basic distinction, but quite relevant for us. Abstract concrete dichotomy. This is how it is called in literature quite often. What are concrete and abstract objects, and what are concrete and abstract concepts? Just very, very briefly, what is the relation between object and concept? Object is something that exists in the world. Concept is something that exists in our brains or minds, whatever. And concepts represent objects. So we have abstract objects and abstract concepts that represent these objects, and we have concrete objects, physical objects, and concrete concepts. That's the difference at the very basic level. But what does it exactly mean? Concrete concepts represent objects that can be experienced by senses. So concrete objects are these objects that we encounter in our everyday life, like chair, cat, window, computer, and so on. Concrete objects are physical objects. And if we think about concrete concepts and concrete objects in the legal context, it seems that we have many concrete legal concepts: consumer, human being, thing, and so on. Not all legal concepts are abstract, but what are abstract legal concepts? Abstractness is a feature of concept that doesn't represent an object existing in a physical sense. So abstract objects, as I mentioned, are objects that are not physical objects. For instance, they are pure mental creations like justice, like law, like obligation, duty, fairness, and so on, democracy. There are no real it means physical, material objects that are represented by this concept. But we do have these concepts in our minds. We do process this concept, we use them. We also have many words that are linked to these concepts. So the sphere of abstractness is very important for us, especially in legal context, because law is an abstract artifact. It is created by us, so it is an artifact, and it is abstract because there exists no physical object that we call law. Of course, we have legal acts published in the form of books, but it doesn't mean this book, a code, let's say civil code, is not a legal act, because legal act is something abstract. Just like, I don't know, a book. Yeah, if you buy a book, you buy a physical object, but we know that book is something different. The book is rather an abstract object. So the most general definition is that abstract objects are objects that are not tangible, visible, etc. So abstract objects cannot be perceived by us, and they exist only as a social fiction, to be honest. Of course, not all philosophers will agree, that's true. But if we have this dichotomy of abstract and concrete objects, then abstract objects are these objects that doesn't exist in a physical way. And why is this distinction important from the perspective of law, and especially from the point of view of cognitive legal studies? Please note that pivotal legal concepts are abstract. Justice, property, crime, intellectual property is even more abstract than property, because property can be treated both as an abstract concept if we think about certain feature, about certain rights, and if we think about property as an object that is my property, then it is a concrete concept. But intellectual property is even more abstract concept, because it is a metaphor that is grounded in this primary concept of property. We in law we have many abstract concepts, and these concepts are crucial because, of course, concrete concepts are also relevant, for instance, in the process of legal decision making. But from the point of view of legal system and its basis, abstract concepts are crucial. And so now we have this distinction between concrete and abstract concepts. And this lecture is about metaphors. So how can metaphor theory help us to understand abstract concepts? We need to briefly go back to embodied cognition research paradigm. I said go back because there is another lecture in this series devoted specifically to embodied cognition. What is the main idea of embodied cognition? Let me start with a quote. This is something that was written by one of the crucial, most important psychologists of 21st century. Embodied cognition is the latest sexy topic in cognitive science. There is, however, a great deal of confusion about exactly what it means and how to study it. So, embodied cognition is a very popular research paradigm or research program, but the problem is that there are many definitions of what embodied cognition is, and it is really unclear what it means that cognition is embodied. But let's start from the beginning, because a crucial concept from the point of view of research program of embodied cognition is mental simulation. And what is mental simulation? Very briefly, if we think about something, then our brain re-experiences this object. And for instance, if we think about an apple, the same parts of the brain are active as when we see or eat apples. And this link between simulation and reactivation of brain is confirmed or corroborated by many experiments and fMRI studies. For instance, thinking about a telephone is linked to the reactivation of the areas of the brain responsible for speech production. Thinking about cinnamon is linked to the reactivation of the olfactory cortex. If you want to read more about these experiments, please check the paper written by Lawrence Barsalou, the most prominent researcher in this area. That is called that this paper is grounded cognition. The title is Grounded Cognition. You can find it easily in the web. So the basic idea of embodied cognition is that if we think about something, then we re-experience this object and we simulate interactions with this object. For instance, if I think about a cat, then my brain doesn't process an abstract symbol that is CAT. My brain re-experiences all my interactions with cats, and the same parts of my brain are active as these parts which are active when I, for instance, observe a cat or have an interaction with a cat. So that's the very basic, of course, painting with a broad brush because we don't have enough time. But this is the idea of embodied cognition and embodied mental simulation. And now let me ask you one question. Going back to this abstract concrete dichotomy in the context of legal concepts. If we want to accept this idea that mental simulation is one of the basic cognitive processes, do we have a problem if we want to adapt this theory, to apply this theory in our theories of legal concepts? Of course, because there is no problem with mental simulation of concrete objects. And as I said, it is quite well corroborated by neuroimaging studies. But if we think about abstract concepts, and as we said, many legal concepts are abstract, and crucial legal concepts, law, justice, obligation, and so on, they are abstract. Then how can we simulate these concepts? This is really a big problem. And this is what Anna Borgi called the challenge for embodied cognition. Abstract concepts are a big challenge for embodied cognition. If we want to accept this point of view, this research program, then we have a trouble in explaining processing of abstract concepts, and especially the processing of abstract legal concepts. Because the theory of mental simulation works really well for the processing of concrete concepts. However, it is unclear how simulation can be the mechanism responsible for the processing of abstract concepts. And now we can go to our main topic today, conceptual metaphor theory. Because this problem of abstract concepts is something that can be solved at least partially, because it's controversial, and in the second part of this lecture today I will try to explain why. But the tool that can be used to link mental simulation with processing of abstract concepts is conceptual metaphor theory. This theory is currently evaluated as the most plausible theory, or one of the most plausible theories of abstract embodied concepts. Metaphor here is interpreted not as a linguistic tool, as a tool of poets or literature of people from literature studies. No. Metaphor is a cognitive tool, is a bridge between multimodal simulations, because multimodal means that we use information from different senses in mental simulation that I mentioned 2 minutes ago. So we have a bridge. This bridge is metaphor. Metaphor is this bridge because on the one hand, we have mental simulation of concrete concepts. On the other hand, on the other side, we have abstract concepts that cannot be perceived, cannot be bodily experienced. And metaphor as this link. And this is a quote from a very famous book written by George Lakoff and Mark Johnson. These two American, Lakoff is American linguist, cognitive scientist, Johnson is cognitive scientist and philosopher. These two guys are perhaps people who are well known as creators of cognitive metaphor or conceptual metaphor theory. And please let me just read this passage from their book, Metaphors We Live By. The heart of metaphor is inference. Conceptual metaphor allows inferences in sensory motor domains, for example, domains of space and objects. So here we have concrete domain of concrete objects and concrete concepts. And this domain can be used to draw inferences about other domains. For example, domains of subjective judgment. We can also add the legal domain and so on. Because we reason in terms of metaphor, the metaphors we use determine a great deal about how we live our lives. So, what is the basic idea? The basic idea is that we have concrete domain of concrete objects and concrete concepts, and abstract domain. And we can only understand the abstractness because we use metaphorical simulation or mapping. We take something from the concrete domain to think about the abstract domain. And this is how our cognition of abstractness can be embodied. It cannot be embodied directly because we cannot experience bodily abstract objects that do not exist in a physical sense. But we can think of them in terms of something concrete. So we take ways of thinking about concrete objects and we use them to think about abstract objects. And the metaphors are present in language because we can notice these metaphors when we analyze our language, our ordinary language, legal language, and so on. But mapping is a cognitive mechanism. And the analysis of linguistic expressions may uncover metaphorical mappings that determine our ways of thinking. And let me just briefly introduce several examples of metaphorical abstract concepts. And in the next part, I will go into details of what it means that law is metaphorical and legal concepts are metaphorical. Law. Why is the concept of law metaphorical? Please think about the phrase, he broke the law. Can we break the law? Absolutely not. Law is something abstract. So here we use a metaphor, law is a material object. We have many hierarchical concepts in law. The highest court. Why the highest court? Not because the building is the highest in United Kingdom, Poland, Netherlands, and so on. Absolutely not. Because high, if something is higher, it means that it is better. And this is a basic metaphor. More is up. I have already mentioned intellectual property, but we have also crime and justice, which are also abstract concepts and which can be treated as metaphors. So that's the very introduction. Thank you very much for your attention, and please feel invited for the second part of today's lecture.